Hello, storytellers. I'm Mikey from Digital Storytellers.
I'm Tash, nice to meet you.
And we're a film production agency based in Sydney. We're going to take some time to show you how to put together your own videos. But before we show you how to make your own video, we just want to talk for a moment or two about storytelling itself. Storytelling is as natural as being human itself. I'd like to show you something. Here's your brain on facts and figures and language, but here's your brain on story. This is what happens if you tell stories and you engage people through their senses of taste and smell. If you engage somebody visually and you get them emotionally engaged into a story. This is what your brain looks like in an MRI when all those parts are being activated, and that's what good engagement looks like. Now, storytelling's been around for a long time. We're here in Australia, and it's home to one of the oldest cultures in the world, 50,000 years of Aboriginal culture. We've been sitting around like this, around fires, telling stories for as long as we've been human. Out there in the world, there are some fantastic storytellers, but not all of them good. In fact, these people are using things like fear and distrust to tell a good story and to bring more power to themselves. So that's why you gotta be more like Naomi Klein, one of my favorite storytellers, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Naomi. The most pressing task of storytelling in this moment is to helping unlock the imagination, to have another ending. That ending being one where we don't destroy ourselves, right? All right, so that's why you guys have to do a good job of this stuff. But I want to also tell you that you don't have to be a famous person like Donald Trump or Pauline Hanson or even Naomi Klein to tell a good story. This is Kyla. She's 14 years old, from Bellingen, and she told an amazing story about her connection with nature through an animal, a shark, a much maligned animal here in Australia. But that story, which we can't play you today because it's a bit long, okay, really affected me and actually changed how I feel about sharks and shark fin soup, which is something from my culture as Chinese people. And I'm really glad we didn't have it at my wedding, let's just say, all right? And Kyla reminded me of that fact through a powerful story that she told. Now today, video is one of the most powerful mediums you can use to express your story. It's because you get people visually, it's because you can have real voices and emotion inside the story, and because you can actually show and not tell. That video is currently the medium of today, the currency of today. So that's why we're encouraging you to make your own videos, and now Tash is going to take over with a few more tips and tricks.
The exciting part about all of this is that you can start telling video stories right away with these things, our smartphones. They're becoming more and more powerful and they're getting in the hands of more and more people, allowing everyone everywhere to be telling stories. Now, the clip that we're showing you right now, this is actually a clip created by a group of professional filmmakers from Riot, but using smartphones for the entire documentary. And you'll see some incredible shots here. Now, they've got all these kind of fancy gimbals and gadgets behind there, but you don't need all of that to tell an incredible story using your smartphone. And probably some of the most powerful shots that you can see there in this clip are actually the more simple ones, the close-ups, the beautiful daylight shots, the colors. So I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks on how to capture something like this and encourage you to get out your phone and give this a go. So here's the basics of smartphone filmmaking. First of all, don't shoot like this, shoot like this, horizontally. We live in a widescreen world, and for most mediums these days, you want to be shooting in a widescreen format. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is, as tempting as it is, don't use the digital zoom on your phones. All that's going to do is enlarge the pixels, and while it might look fine when you're looking at your film on your phone, as soon as you put that on a bigger screen, it's going to look lower quality and pixelated. So tip number 2. Tip number 3 is make sure you have a good lighting setup when you're shooting with your smartphone, whether that's daylight, whether you have a torch with baking paper over the top to light up your interview subject. Smartphones work best in high light conditions, so make sure you take advantage of that. The third thing I'd say is that sound is super important when it comes to video storytelling. I'd say it's at least 50% of the overall impact of your film. Now you'll notice on your smartphones, most of the microphones are out this way, which means it's going to record the sound from over here, rather than whatever is in front of you. So I would really encourage you to invest in a smartphone microphone like this little bad boy, the Rode SmartLav. No, they don't sponsor us, they're just really, really decent microphones. They plug right into your phone and will allow you to get really crystal clear audio quality from whoever's voice you're recording. And the final thing I'd say as a basic is that when it comes to smartphone filming, you really have to make sure that something you think of in advance is how much storage you have on your phone and how much battery life you have on your phone. There's nothing worse than going to film and getting that notification pop up that you can't film because there's not enough of that. So it's around 150 megabytes is equal to about a minute of smartphone high definition film. So you can keep that in mind when calculating how much storage you might need to actually capture what you need to capture. Now there are a few other little gadgets that you can get, and we'll make sure we put a link to those in the resources, some little tripods you can use for your smartphones and other different microphones and lenses. But most importantly, number one, just make sure you're passionate about whatever you're filmmaking about.
So one of the basic skills you'll need in almost any video that you create is how to set up an interview properly. And here we have a typical setup for an interview. On my left is the interviewee, on my right is camera person Tash, okay? And I will stand as the interviewer just off camera to Tash to this side, so Tom talks to me off camera. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your interview camera is just slightly below the eye line of your interviewee, meaning that the camera is just angled up just a tiny bit, which gives them a little bit of prominence inside of your shot. Next thing to make sure of is the headroom, okay? Don't leave a huge gap above your interviewee's head. Try and keep that gap in a nice sort of position so that this is a standard way that your audience would expect a person to be interviewed. A background is important, so don't forget that you can say something with the background that's inside of the shot behind your interviewer, your interviewee. So in this case, we've got the stories in the background. Self-plugging there, that's all right. And the last point is a little speech bubble is how we tend to set up the interviews, meaning that we like to put the interviewee on one side of the shot and sort of see that a speech bubble could pop out beside them during the interview in terms of maybe we could put some quotes there, or in this case, it's the background shot. The next tip is around the sound of the interview itself. All right? In this case, we've got a microphone here for the mobile phone, and the microphone just makes sure that the sound received from our interviewee is nice and crystal clear. Oftentimes on the mobile phone, the microphone is not that good. The iPhone is not bad, but your camera might not be right next to the interviewee, or there might be some background noise. So by using a Rode SmartLav, is what we have here, okay, you'll get much better sound from the interviewee. Okay? Next thing is the lighting on the interviewee. Okay? We have a setup here where we have some lights that we've brought for this setup, plus we have some windows over there. What you don't want to do is shoot into a window itself, because that throws out the exposure completely. Or if you've got bright sunlight coming down on somebody's head, that also doesn't make them look good, because that'll create shadows underneath their eyes. What you're looking for is a nice balanced lighting situation where your interviewee has good tone and color on their face and consistent lighting. So say you've got yellow indoor lights because you're working indoors, plus white lights that you might have brought. Mixing the light sources ain't a great idea. The next tip is to make sure that you ask your interviewee to rephrase the question inside their answer. So if I ask Tom, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
For breakfast this morning I had eggs and bacon, Mikey.
Tom put the question inside the answer. So if he had just said eggs and bacon, we wouldn't have been able to edit that on its own without putting the question inside. The next thing I shouldn't do is interrupt my interviewee when they're answering a question. So for instance, if I ask Tom again, what were you having for breakfast?
Well, this morning for breakfast...
Oh wait, what about the eggs and bacon you said earlier?
Yes.
And bad, don't do that. All right? But generally what you need is a nice clean answer from your interview when you're answering those questions. And finally, one of the last questions, one of the best tips we have is to ask our interviewee, do you have anything else to add? Okay? And when you ask that question, it's an open-ended question, which at the end of the interviewee's been answering your questions, but maybe thinking something else that they really wanted to express. Oftentimes, we get the best part of our interviews by just asking that question at the end of the interview.
Well, the best thing was that it was chilly inside.
Let's go to cutaways. So once you've recorded your key interview, it's time to go find some footage to put on top of that interview. And it just goes back to that point of showing and not telling. For each cutaway shot, you should try to generate about 3 to 5 seconds of footage, but even 10 seconds, a little bit on the front and a little bit on the end, and that way you can edit in between. Now, what should you shoot with cutaways? Well, Oftentimes, if we've made an interview of somebody, we want to see that interviewee doing things in context. Whether say they're a boot maker, then you should definitely film them making boots. Say they're a camera operator or a filmmaker like me, well, you should probably get a shot of them behind the camera, doing their work, doing their profession, putting them in context so you can tell the story. Once you're approaching a situation or a scene, think in wide, medium, tight. That's what we do here at Digital Storytellers when we're making our cutaways. Use a wide shot to establish the scene, do a medium shot to bring the audience a little bit closer into it, and do a tight shot to get details of say, beautiful fabrics or colors in your scene. Angle is another thing you can play with when you're doing your cutaways, and you can basically give the audience a feel for something by how you angle your camera. So for instance, let's look at this monk. When I shoot upwards towards him, I make him look a little more heroic. But when I shoot over his shoulder or something else, I give the impression that we're maybe looking at something that he's looking at. Another way to work with cutaways is to move your camera. So for instance, in this shot, we're moving from side to side to give it sort of like a motion effect. Okay? Or we can use a zooming effect along a track in order to create a sense for motion. And this helps create sort of like an epic feel in our footage. You can do the same thing on your mobile phone. You can be the human slider that moves around. Just use your whole body so that it's nice and steady when you do that shot.
So I'm sure you're wondering, now I've got all this footage, how do I put it together? I'm going to give you a few recommendations of software you can use across your smartphone or a laptop to put that footage together. So firstly, smartphone editing software. If you're looking for something that's free and pretty basic and easy to use, I'd recommend looking at Adobe Clip. It works across both iOS and Android devices, and you can always actually connect it to your Adobe Creative Cloud account later so that you can graduate from using Adobe Premiere Clip to something more advanced later. However, if you're looking to get into some pretty intricate smartphone editing in your phone, I would recommend looking at LumaFusion. It allows multi-track editing, which will allow you to overlay cutaways over the top of interviews. It has a royalty-free music library inside the software, and you'll be able to upload directly from that software to Facebook and any other platforms that you want to via your smartphone. So a really good option there and a really solid editing program. Now, if you prefer editing on your laptop to have a bit more control, be able to do a little more intricate edits, the #1 recommendation that we would have is Adobe Premiere Pro. It's what we use as professionals, but it's also fairly user-friendly to allow beginners like you to get into the program. Apart from that, I'd also look at Video, which is an in-browser editing software. So it means that you don't have to have a fancy computer to make use of it. The other one I'd have a little look at is Lightworks, which is similar to Premiere Pro, has less of the professional features, but is going to allow you to put something together in a fairly simple way. Now, there are plenty of tutorials out there on editing on smartphone and on laptops, and some will include in the resources. So have a look there to take the next step.
So there you have it. It's a super basic introduction to mobile and smartphone shooting. At Digital Storytellers, we didn't know what we were doing when we got started, but we've learned everything we need to know by just going for it and learning every step of the way.
There's so much that we want to share you about what we've learned along the way from our successes and our failures. So if you do want to learn more, please do join us at one of our in-person workshops or via our online course. And you can find out more about them in the resources for this course. But honestly, the best way that you can learn is to just pick up your smartphone and give it a go. Make mistakes and get your story out there. So good luck.
Good luck. Go for it. And we'll see your story soon.